To paraphrase the famous song from Hair, this is the dawning of the age of aluminum. And a very special age it is, that will be recorded by historians as the Aluminium Age. Although aluminium has been produced commercially for less than 150 years and is still a very young metal, and although mankind has been using copper, lead and tin for thousands of years, today more aluminium is produced than all the other non-ferrous metals combined. It's almost as though aluminium has imposed itself upon us rather than we who have utilized it. But before I go, I have to tell you, at the conference a couple of months ago, Alan Cook and I were standing at the bar before the banquet, and we were talking about an aspect of aluminium casting of cylinder heads on which we had both worked half a lifetime ago. And we must have appeared particularly intense because the guy running the bar said, "What are you talking about?" And we said, "Aluminium." He said, "I don't know him," and wandered away mumbling something about Al Capone and Al Pacino. Now, I'm not being critical of the thing. I mean, he can make martinis better than Alan and I can. It's just what we know about. But it did lead me to think about what sort of a person aluminium would be if it were human. I mean, some of the metals are easily personified. Iron and lead, for example, would be the dark, dirty Dickensian coal miners and iron foundry workers of the late 19th century in the Welsh valleys, tramping 6 miles to work and back in pitch black, Bible black, no light mornings and evenings on their to and fro way around their 12-hour shifted 6-day week, relieved only with Saturday night on the booze and a slow recovery in the chapel in the morning. Gold and silver might be female film and popular music stars, Marilyn Monroe, Madonna, Halle Berry, Taylor Swift, glistening, skin-deep beauties. Entertaining, certainly, delightful to gaze upon when well lit, but not productive like poor old iron and lead, and in a totally different class of society. Mercury and platinum would be sports people, perhaps, the Novak Djokovic or the Lionel Messi of today, or maybe hunters of a previous age bringing down the bison on some long gone plain. Tin, copper, zinc, nickel, throughout times have been the business leaders of the local community. In Roman times, they would have been slave traders and winemakers. In the Wild West, they would have been saloon keepers and gunsmiths. Post-war, the bank managers and doctors. Today, the social media giants, the artificial intelligence experts. Tungsten and titanium might be chief executive officers of large companies, pockets full of shares and unfulfilled contracts. Antimony, bismuth, palladium, the upper classes of days gone by, the wigged brigade, dirty dinners at country mansions and a touch of the hound in the morning, Lord Antimony, Lady Bismuth, Sir Reginald Palladium. So where does aluminium fit into this personified population? I think aluminium would have been a trade unionist, not your shoppy shop steward, trained in England years ago and then trapped in some sort of time warp after he emigrated, left to annoy responsible management. But a sort of Bill Kelty, Bob Hawke, Bill Shorten rolled together, but with a fair dollop of John Setka thrown in. For not all of aluminium's characteristics are attributes. There's a measure of evil associated with its goodness. Just when you think you've struck a great enterprise bargaining agreement, aluminium will tell you it also wants free train travel. So hold this vision of aluminium personified and decide for yourselves whether I have properly cut its cloth. It took millennia to unlock the metal from its sources. Although it comprises 8% of the top 10 miles of the surface of the Earth, and is the third most abundant element on the Earth's surface. Only oxygen and silicon are more common. It's never found in its pure form. And that's the reason it was never stumbled on accidentally, as was copper by some crocodilian cooking caveman at a culinary convention, or gold one morning when some half-clothed early man was bedazzled by the reflective sunlight as he awoke on a dry creek bed that he had stumbled into the previous night after a massive session on a wild berry fermentation that would render today's most potent brews as to sarsaparilla in the comparison. Despite the millions of years that mankind has meandered the earth, it took until 1807 for Sir Humphrey Davy to show that the metal existed. And even this brilliant scientist could not extract the pure aluminium. He did, though, give the impending metal a name. He called it aluminium, which he later changed to aluminum. Now, the English keepers of the periodic table at the time changed it to aluminium. But as you know, the North Americans retained the name aluminum, obviously contributing to the metal's tendency towards schizophrenia. In 1825, the Danish Hans Christian Ørsted finally produced aluminium in the laboratory, and in 1845, Frederick Wöhler produced sufficient metallic aluminium to determine some of its visual and mechanical properties. It was the French Henri St. Clair de Ville that improved Wöhler's process and made sufficient aluminium for the Paris Exposition of 1855. And so aluminium was born. This birth, coupled with the fact that the most common ore of aluminium was discovered near the village of Le Beau in southern France and called bauxite as a consequence, leaves us in no doubt that aluminium is of European extraction. At this time, aluminium was regarded as a precious metal because of the huge cost of production. And even 30 years later, when the process was improved, only 15 tons of the metal was produced annually. It took two different people working in different places, unknown to each other, to invent an identical process, which is the basis for all aluminium production today. They were Louis Hérault in France and Martin Hall in the USA. And by enormous coincidence, they were both born in 1863 and both died in 1914. And it's almost surprising that they lived to be 50 after working on a process that is as injurious to health as the extraction process of any element. And this is one of the negatives in our equation with our relationship with aluminium. The fluorides evolved in the process, if not properly collected, can reach the atmosphere and cause respiratory diseases, including bronchitis and asthma, have an impact on calcium in human bones, cause lung cancer, and are thought to influence the onset of Alzheimer's disease. So when you drive around Portland and see animals grazing in close proximity to the smelter, you may well be witnessing the use of the cow as a contemporary canary. For just as the canary showed the earliest signs of carbon monoxide poisoning in coal mines, so too might the cow display the earliest symptoms of the effects of the smelter's waste gases. A very large smelter was built in Bratsk, Russia in 1966. The website will tell you that it produces over 1 million tons of aluminium a year. It will also tell you that brotherly metallurgists are systematically working to reduce costs, save energy, and implementing the ecological Soderberg technology. It won't tell you that by 1985, less than 20 years after it was built, trees up to 20 kilometers to the west and 30 kilometers to the east had been destroyed by pollution. The inhabitants of the adjacent village of Chitanovsky fall ill continually, and although some 650 families have been relocated, in a program that began in 1994, those who have moved and those that remain are still ill. Despite its abundance in nature, combined with a variety of elements, primarily oxides and silicates, due to its enormous reactivity, it took the advent of electricity to allow aluminium to be produced. And for this reason, aluminium smelters are usually found in areas of relatively cheap sources of electricity, with about 55% of the world's production powered by hydroelectricity. It takes 5 tons of bauxite to produce a ton of the shining pure metal, which, when polished, has the greatest reflectivity of any material, even greater than that of mirror glass. You can do anything with it. It reacts with, well, iron, silicon, zinc, copper, anything you want. And it can be extruded, hot rolled, cold rolled, cast using 3 different die casting techniques. In fact, at this stage, I was going to talk about aluminium casting, but I think most of you know more about it than I do, and it's very complicated. And Gary Savage would ask questions all the time. And I also realized that it's, you guys have worked all day and it's difficult for you to concentrate. In fact, the research shows only 60% are listening, 15% of you are asleep, and the remaining 25% are enjoying some sort of sexual fantasies. So in the hope I'm not interrupting you, instead of the casting, I'll tell you about Di and Yanto, 2 Welshmen who used to meet every Tuesday and Saturday at the pub. And one Tuesday, Di drove up in a Lamborghini, and Yanto said, "Di, where the bloody hell did you get that car?" He said, "Betty gave it to me." "Good God," he said, "I know she likes you a lot, but a Lamborghini." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what happened." He said, "We went to the theatre in Cardiff on Saturday, and Betty had the Lamborghini. We were driving home, and she stopped at that Llandaff Park." She said, and she parked the car, and we went into the woods, and she took all her clothes off and said, "Take what you want." So I took the Lamborghini. And Yanto said, "That's pretty clever, Di." He said, "because those clothes would never have fitted you." The fact that aluminium has so many alloys has led to its enormous growth in its use. I mean, in the air, we wouldn't have a commercial aviation industry without aluminium. For example, an Airbus 220 contains 40% aluminium or aluminium alloys. Space shuttles are between 50 and 90% aluminium. On sea, everything's made of aluminium. Canada's fast trains, France's high-speed trains, Japan's bullet trains, the maglev in Shanghai all have passenger carriages made of aluminium, as do almost all underground train systems. And you know what it's like in the motor industry on the road. It's prophesied in North America, it's expected that the average weight of aluminium per car will increase by 45 kilograms by 2030, and that the car will contain 250 kilograms of aluminium, an increase of 250% since 1990. And 90% of trucks and buses have aluminium bodies. In building, it's resistant to corrosion. Its strength and lightness makes it desirable for earthquake-prone zones. It's used in panels, doors, windows, roofing, insulation. In cooking, half the cooking utensils each year are made of, that are sold each year, are made of aluminium. In packaging, the examples are myriad, but none as graphical as the aluminium can. Oh, please eat. Don't not eat because I'm speaking. Well, don't eat. The amount of aluminium produced each year rose from, but it's going to get cold, please eat. Rose from 15 tons in 1885 to 10,000 in 1900, 500,000 in 1938, 20 million in 2000, and last year, 70 million tons. And as another famous owl, the white-gloved Jolson used to say, "You ain't seen nothing yet," because as you know, every gram of this product from every saucepan or engine block or 747 can be commercially, and that's profitably, recycled. The aluminium that was the crumpled Coke can in Canada last week can be part of a Harley-Davidson wheel manufactured at the York factory next week, spend the next 5 years in a mist of marijuana with a Memphis Midnight Maulers motorcycle gang before moving on to be a window frame in an Elon Musk 16-seater space shuttle circumnavigating the Earth in 2029. As for the future, there can only be an enormous increase in the usage of aluminium, even if it's based on its current applications. And what about those uses that are still to be developed? Logically, aluminium will be the next clothing material. After all, it's only a small step from its current use, sprayed on polymer as a protective covering for newborn babies or to save the life on someone on an exposed mountaintop. The range of clothing could be anything from sparkling suits to sedate shirts to sporty shorts. And the beauty of this clothing is that when it's soiled, you just hose it down. Aluminium might also be used in the construction of huge undersea domes. They would be massive buildings along the lines of the world's newest sports stadiums, but about 1,000 times as big and without the retractable roof. They could be constructed by divers, and when completed, the seawater could be pumped out, making them an ideal habitat for the post-nuclear war era. And if we're leading some preordained existence, as well we might be, you might wonder why there's 8% of aluminium in the top 10 miles of the surface of the Earth, and why it's so difficult to get out. Maybe we're destined to use it in situ. What if we could develop a method of transferring energy through aluminium compounds? We could leave them in the Earth, and all we'd have to do would be to feed energy into the Earth's surface at any given point and take it out somewhere else. Television transmission stuffed into the Earth in Edinburgh could come out in Edmonton, and for the first time, the World Wide Web could live up to its pretentious title. All we'd need would be a probe that went deep into the Earth for each household with little switches on top. So when you pressed light, you'd get light. Not electricity to put in a bulb to heat an element to make it glow, but light. Light pushed into the Earth from the 24-hour daylight of the Arctic could pop out in Arkansas and Addis Ababa simultaneously. Cold from Siberia could cool Cairns in Canberra, and heat from Harare and Harushpu could warm the cockles of hearts in Hedemora, the Hebrides, and Harrington Harbour. So when you're traveling in a car, in a bus, or a plane, when you slide closed your shower door, when you're in the stadium at Docklands, when you see the statue of Eros at Trafalgar Square, because that's aluminium too, give this young super metal an extra thought. And cast your minds forward to the time when your future generations might be sitting around their aluminium probes, in their aluminium pajamas, in their aluminium deep sea domes, in their aluminium translated twilight, listening to the aluminium assisted refrains of the great Lonnie Donegan, singing his tribute to the Grand Coulee Dam, the only song I've ever heard that mentions the indispensable metal. And I'll leave you with his words that describe the industry that built up along the banks of the Columbia River, utilizing the hydroelectricity produced by that great dam. And Lonnie said, "Now from Washington and Oregon, you can hear the factories hum, making chrome and making manganese and white aluminum."